everyone, and welcome to Frontlines and Faultlines, a new program that's going to be broadcast to you under the banner of the National Security Institute at the University of Canberra. Really wonderful to have you with us. We have a specific concept and mission in mind. We believe there's a lot to be done in today's world to contribute to truth and facts in our public discourse. We've had a real struggle, I think, in recent years with misinformation and disinformation, and so many complex issues in the world today that it's very important that we can address and unpack those issues so that there's a better understanding and a better debate on them. And this podcast will be addressing a range of issues that relate to current issues that are perplexing the world today. And those will relate to geopolitics, to history, to military affairs, international law, domestic Australian security, and, of course, government policy development as related to those things. So part of that will be to have conversations with experts and people who are serious commentators in the relevant fields of subject matter that we'll be dealing with. As part of our podcast and as part of the National Security Institute, we're very fortunate to have our own internal expertise. And today we're going to introduce you to the three main personnel involved in the Institute. And in particular, I have with me Michael Jensen, who's an international expert in the field of information warfare. And we're going to be starting our series of programs on this subject so that we will set a foundation for the discussion of all these other issues that will follow. So, Michael, you've been at the University of Canberra now for a while, but where do you hail from originally?
So originally, I'm from Southern California and got my PhD out there at the University of California, Irvine. Spent 5 years in Barcelona, and now I've ended up in Canberra. So I can say I've lived in three of the most desirable places in the world.
Right. And when did you first come to Australia?
I first came to Australia about 12 years ago in April 2013.
Right. And are there any particular interests that you have in life outside of academia?
Outside of academia, I'm mostly just consumed by my young kids. But I do enjoy mountain climbing when I get the chance to do it. And regrettably, I haven't been over to New Zealand yet, but we've done some hiking around in the mountains here and climbed several of the 14,000 footers in California.
Right. Well, if you're going from mountains to the subterranean world of information warfare. But can I ask, when did you first come to University of Canberra?
So I started here at the University of Canberra. In fact, I interviewed for the job while I was still living in Barcelona at about 11:30 at night there. And don't tell anybody this, but I was wearing slippers at the time with my suit. But anyway.
Right. Yes, it's good when cameras can only focus waist up. That was the blessing of COVID, I think. So when you first came to the university, what faculty did you join?
So I started off at the Institute for Governance and Policy Analysis. That institute no longer exists, and so now I am a member of the Faculty of Business, Government, and Law at the university.
Right. And so when did you start developing an interest in information warfare?
I think the turning point for me was in 2016. Now, I'd studied political communication as, a fairly conventional scholar of political science, but I began to see in the 2016 U.S. election around June-ish that Russia was clearly involved and interested in this election in a way that they normally were not in the past. Mm-hmm. And the means they were using were not things that we typically understood in conventional terms of political communication. Mm-hmm. So as a result, I started to read as voraciously as I could the literature on information warfare, right, because that was the only place where their interventions really made sense, mm-hmm, that the concepts developed in that practical literature really helped explain what was going on in that election. And so from there, I began to study like their trolling operations and, right, learning about the Russian Internet Research Agency and so forth, mm-hmm, and broader doctrines about Russian influence activities.
Right. So for you, it was a deeply personal thing of what was going on in the United States at the time and how vulnerable the United States was and what could be done about it, I guess.
That's right. Although, to be frank, I mean, I had similar feelings in 2019
Right.
when the parliament here was hacked. And I was like, I've seen this film before. So I began writing several pieces for the conversation at that point in time. And I carried out a research project with a colleague from Taiwan, looking at Chinese intentions with regards to the election in Australia. And sure enough, after we published our findings that China thought very critically of the incumbent government at the time. There was a piece in the Global Times about a week later suggesting, isn't it time for a change in the Australian government?
Right. Okay. So another dimension to what you saw unfolding in the United States and understanding this was kind of going global, so to speak.
That's right. I mean, these are tools that other actors can pick up. And the thing about information warfare is, when we talk about politics and budgets and so forth, they fixate a lot on the big item things like, jet fighters, submarines, or new ships. Probably the biggest bang for the buck is in the information domain.
Right. So this obviously became a major concern for you and led you to do a lot of research in this space. What kind of research have you done? Papers that you've written? How many papers have you written on this subject so far?
I couldn't give you a number off the top of my head of the number of papers I've written on it. It's probably, a dozen to 2 dozen in various forms. But I've looked at in a number of different ways what Russia was doing in the context of the United States, developing different theoretical accounts of how they produce effects. I've looked at influence operations with respect to the pre-invasion period in 2022 for Ukraine and some of the overt and covert Russian efforts in that space. I've looked at efforts to produce influence in some of our Pacific Island neighbors like Vanuatu and the Solomon Islands, as well as influence efforts here in Australia.
Right. Okay. Fascinating that you may be the only person who's been looking at the Pacific in those terms. I don't know much research that's happened in that realm. So,
one of the interesting things I found about that realm is that, for example, a few weeks before the Solomon Islands election in 2024, there were a series of articles that suggested the CIA was planning some sort of a coup to overthrow a government in the Solomon Islands if they didn't like the election result. And that actually started off in Russian propaganda. It was developed. There are a few iterations in some of their outlets before it was then later picked up by Chinese overt propaganda outlets.
Right. And so I guess there's a question to be asked about how many people are seriously delving into these issues, what our agencies are doing in terms of research and staying on top of this. And so as you have progressed through your academic research and your time here at the University of Canberra, what sort of engagement have you had with other international academics or agencies that are looking at this issue?
Well, the Department of Defense here is engaged in this topic. They're currently building up their cognitive warfare capabilities. It's an interest to the Department of Defense Science and Technology Group here in Australia. I've done a couple studies for them on some of these topics. Beyond that, I mean, broadly within political science and within communication studies, there's been an explosion of research on the topic of misinformation and how to combat it.
Right. So is your sense of it that we are seeing now a serious intellectual effort to address this subject across academia and government agencies?
I think there is an effort. The level of seriousness, somewhat, I think, remains to be seen. There is somewhat of a disconnect between a lot of the academic literature and national security spaces. There was a book that was published about 5 years ago by a professor at the University of Notre Dame. The book was called The Cult of the Irrelevant, which was about the yawning gap between the field of national security and academia, and particularly the social sciences. That a lot of the theoretical concerns that drive the social sciences are often alien to the practical demands and needs of the field of national security. And so that's why I'm a little bit hesitant to say that this explosion of work in the social sciences necessarily addresses the national security dimensions of that. And that's actually one of the things that the National Security Institute that we're building here is looking to close that gap, to develop rigorous, methodologically informed research that addresses concrete needs of the national security community here in Australia.
Right. So I guess a key takeaway from that is that this really is a multidisciplinary subject and challenge, and that a lot of, I guess, intersection and cross-pollination, if you like, across those disciplines is really necessary. And would you say that also includes those who are involved in the research on technologies and the means of delivery of this issue?
Absolutely. We need a broad, multidisciplinary team to really address a lot of these complex national security problems that intersect technological dimensions, they intersect legal dimensions, and then there's the broad issues with respect to building societal resilience, which you can imagine there's space for anthropologists, sociologists, people in the field of journalism and media, as well as political scientists to take leading roles.
Right. And so when we talk about that research and we talk about those other dimensions, I guess, that will also lead us in the direction of understanding the way that the threat sources have been crafting their challenge to the world and to liberal democracies in particular. But in terms of the technological side of it, do you feel that our agencies and government authorities here in Australia are on top of this technological challenge that relates specifically to information warfare?
I'm not sure that they are, but I get the sense they're somewhat aware that they're a little bit behind. And that's part of the reason for some of the push to develop better capabilities, to stand up divisions that specifically deal with that. And additionally, there's the trickiness of thinking through the domestic space in terms of how do we protect ourselves, particularly at the same time as we don't want to sacrifice the freedom of expression in this country as well. You have a right, as a matter of free speech, to say things that are factually not true to produce political effects. And we want to be wary in a democratic country of adopting like a truth commission that could say, this is wrong, you made a statement that's misleading, you're going to be fined or face other sorts of sanctions for that. We have to be very careful in terms of how we think about approaching these topics so that we protect our citizens' rights,
Right.
but at the same time, we also protect our democracy from broader threats,
Right.
which undermine the capacity of citizens to freely participate in democracy and connect their preferences with their voice choices.
Right. And I suppose that privacy issue is a big part of this. And, we've seen the evolution of things like the GDPR regime in Europe and whatnot. Do you feel that we are mature enough in those safeguards and that those safeguards don't impede our ability to fight back effectively?
Yeah, I don't think that they really impede our ability to fight back, especially since most of these activities are out in the open. I mean, they don't necessarily, when they try to manipulate a public, will do so in a overt way, but they're still producing communications
Right.
that are overt. This is, I guess, the difference between what would be considered covert versus clandestine. Clandestine activity being something that's completely secret.
Right.
Covert activity being something that the author of it is secret. They're hiding their role in the production of something, but you see the results and the impact of that as a result of their actions.
Right. Well, obviously, there's a hell of a lot of work to be done in this field, and I think you'll be kept very busy in your academic life if you continue to focus on this area, but never more necessary. And I'm looking forward, of course, to watching you and seeing you and talking to you and unpacking the detail of this so that we thoroughly understand the threat, and then we can talk through potential options for dealing with it. But now that you're a dinkum Aussie and been here for a while, have you adopted any of the local sports or?
Sadly, I haven't. I grew up a Laker fan. I'm still a Laker fan, and I don't really have much more time in my life to follow any other sports besides the Lakers.
Oh, right. Well, seeing as you're here at the University of Canberra, we'll have to indoctrinate you into the the beauty of the game of rugby. And
That's right. I really should start following the Brumbies.
no worries. No, well, thank you very much, Michael. Really appreciate the chat today and introducing you to hopefully our viewers that will grow over time and pick up the benefit of all your, labours of endeavour in this field, which has obviously been, a long-standing passion, but also a hell of an intellectual commitment that you've made in the work that you've done. So thank you for that. And we look forward to talking to you more.
Well, thank you very much. I'm looking forward to the exciting challenges that are presenting themselves here.
Cheers. Well, welcome back, everybody. And now we're going to round out our chats introducing the team from Frontlines and Faultlines and the National Security Institute. And a great pleasure for me today is to have with us Lieutenant General Peter Ley, AC, former Chief of Army. And Peter, it's wonderful to have you out here at the University of Canberra building up, I think, what is a really exciting future for the university, filling in the space of the national security conversation. But you have a really deep background that equips you so well for this. I think you were the longest serving Chief of Army in the history of the Defence Force, going back to Light Horse Harry Chauvel. And I guess the period of time you served too was from about, 1971 you went into RMC, was it? Or,
that's right, yeah.
Right, okay. And finished up in about, 2008, was it? Or
2008 in July.
Right. So that's a long span of time, and you straddled so many different issues, so many situations that Australia was dealing with during that period, the sort of wind up of the Vietnam War and moving into that long, difficult period of adjustment for the Army and the Defence Force post-Vietnam, and then the rash of operations and problems the world was facing from the fall of the Berlin Wall. So you've seen it all, and you've also had a lot of experience dealing with international authorities and actors. So you're uniquely equipped to be in this position. But also when you were in the Army, you were the Director of Army Research and Analysis. And I know from my time watching you in operation, you really encouraged a lot of thought and contribution by everybody in the Army, no matter what position they filled, to think about how we could improve the Army, how we could build a better defence force. And so through the Future Land Warfare Doctrine and publications, there's a lot of wonderful contributions made during that time. But I guess my question to you would be, having filled all that background in with so much rich experience, and it included serving with the Gurkhas as a company commander, I believe, and you carry some interesting foreign decorations with you as well. When you moved to set up the National Security Institute at the University of Canberra, what was your ambition?
Well, one, I wanted to teach.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to contribute back to the community through teaching. And as an Army career, you're teaching all the time. In my case, I taught at the Officer Cadet School at Portsea.
Right.
I taught at the Infantry Centre at Singleton. And I also taught, and this was a terrific time, in the United States Command and General Staff College in Fort Leavenworth, where I was teaching lieutenant colonels to go on in their careers. So for me, teaching was a bit of a habit. It's something that I enjoyed. And in command positions, you're mentoring, you're leading, and you're teaching and trying to encourage people. So for me, it was something pretty natural.
Right.
And I've been able to, I guess, satisfy that desire to teach, but also think carefully about Australia, our place in the world, and the Defence Force. And obviously I'm biased towards the Army, but the Army's position in national security and the Australian Defence Force, but how we can make sure the Army's a good career and that it does serve the nation. And that, I guess, serving the nation, I used to think about the Army, and I'd be excited when I saw an Army truck go by. The little motto on there was serving the nation.
Right.
And I think in some ways I'm still trying to do that.
Right.
How can I serve the nation?
Draw on the benefit of all that scar tissue. And
That's right, yeah.
One of the things you did too, which was incredibly impressive, was you actually designed a course at US Staff College teaching counterinsurgency.
Yes.
And, of course, later on, the US Army kind of abandoned all thought or doctrine in relation to that, wanting to wipe it under the carpet as a bad experience. But I went back and studied that course material you did. And, of course, learning and teaching counterinsurgency teaches you really all about that whole of government, all the elements of national power you've got to bring to achieve, a good outcome in those situations. Is that also something that you've focused on in terms of like the national policy construct here and what the NSI could contribute to that discussion?
Both at Commander General Staff College, but also through my career here in Australia, because I joined in 1971, graduated as an officer in 1974.
Right.
And we're just coming out of Vietnam. And if you just do the raw figures, there were about 34,000 in the Army at that stage. And then we went through what some people have called the long peace.
Right.
And then we got to things like Cambodia, Rwanda, Somalia. And they were little tests, and they were getting us ready for what was to come.
Right.
And so thinking that Australia through that period had rejected big wars, America had rejected small wars.
Right.
And we weren't allowed to teach Vietnam. And this is the late 80s in the US. We weren't allowed to teach Vietnam because we don't do windows, we don't do floors, and we don't do guerrillas. And the Americans were longing for the Battle of the Fulda Gap,
Right.
where the operational maneuver group from the Soviet Union would come across.
Yeah.
And in some ways, we rejected our past and didn't prepare for the future.
Right.
There was this sort of hollowness about the Army. It was getting smaller. By the time I became chief, we were about 25,000.
Right.
And we weren't ready for those things that started to happen. I'd thought about them in this Directorate of Army Research and Analysis. How do we need to change and what do we need to do? And that's followed through now because I was Chief of Staff at the Australian Theatre. We went to Timor. You were in Timor and you saw what happened there. We weren't ready for that. In many ways, we're lucky to get away with it. If the Indonesians had cut up rough, it would have been very hard. We didn't have the logistics. We didn't have the intelligence. We didn't have the strategic lift, whole range of things. And so to me, the need now was to make changes.
Right.
And so we got this hardened and networked army up and running. And thanks to the then Liberal government and John Howard in particular, he saw the need to change the army for what was coming. And I'd been reading a lot about Paul Kennedy had written The Troubled and Fractured Planet. There's books being written about this time saying, well, hang on, this period of peace, remember, it was the end of history. Francis Fukuyama had talked about that. I know you don't like that phrase because it was totally untrue.
Yes.
We had the peace dividend. And so we go to Timor. It was a struggle. Then things started to move along, and it's Iraq and Afghanistan. It was an even more of a struggle, and we had to pull our punch. What we could offer government, frankly, wasn't enough. And we know in some cases, some Americans would say, hey, you're not pulling your weight. There's a phrase around the Middle East, are you a swimmer or a non-swimmer?
Yep.
We were swimmers, but just. We're doing 25-metre laps rather than 50-metre laps.
Yes.
So to me, that was the exciting part.
Right.
And it was the culmination of that career up until then,
Right.
when I was appointed chief, that we were at it.
Yeah.
In fact, I started using the phrase, this is an army at war, and almost self-consciously. No, well, public, don't worry about it. We've got this, but we needed help. And I think we're in that situation again. And the parallel almost is that the army's getting smaller again. It doesn't have that broad view. It's not allowed to have a broad view.
Right.
And I think, and we're hearing from all our strategists, including those who are in government, this is the most contested period, the most difficult geopolitical period that we've seen for a long time. I don't think we're ready. And that's in large part what I'm trying to do here, get us ready.
Yeah, and I think you identified there was a gap in preparation for, particularly leadership in defence. We'd grown up in that, I guess, quiet period where you'd go out and do your training at places like Puckapunyal and all you'd ever see was kangaroos and emus. And so we completely forgot the human terrain part of this and what is it that actually is the end state that you're looking to achieve. and how do you work with other elements of national power and actors on the battle space to achieve those end states. And so you got that conversation going again, but I guess we've never really stitched up at the strategic level how that should operate in, I guess, a kind of a whole of government campaign planning sense. And
yeah, that's an important point to make, this whole of government, or some people are now calling it a national security approach.
right.
And I've written about this, and I know that you're interested in this, and a lot of others, a national security advisor.
Mm-hmm.
Because we need to think about all the elements of national power.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just the military or the army,
Mm-hmm.
and I think there's an imbalance there. But are we doing the best we can with our diplomacy
Right.
through foreign affairs and trade? Are we doing the best we can through our economic attitudes and our issues? And increasingly important nowadays is what some people are calling soft power.
Yep.
That people want to be like you because they admire you and respect you.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you're not going to deliver everything with soft power, but when you put all of these things together, and now we're worried about what's happening in the cyberspace,
Mm-hmm.
we put some money into that, which is good.
Right.
I'm very concerned about, I think, a war that's already begun, which is the war in space,
Yep.
and we're not ready for that. And
Mm-hmm.
as far as I can see, the ambushes are set, the patrols are out, the reconnaissance parties are out,
Yes.
and the moment there is a conflict, don't rely on space, and we need to protect it. We need to be ready for it.
Mm-hmm.
So as I look back over my career,
Mm-hmm.
there are a few really important parts to it.
Right.
One was the time with the Gurkhas,
Mm-hmm.
and that taught me that Australia really was part of Asia. And I think that's important. And as we look at the Indo-Pacific now,
Mm-hmm.
we need that partnership with Asia. We need to be able to understand them.
Mm-hmm.
And the other part was at Commander General Staff College in the US, where I saw the bigger view of things, the joint and combined view,
Mm-hmm.
and how you need to be working as part of a global alliance.
Right.
So they're the sorts of things that I've taken as lessons that I need to be thinking about and really wanting to, and happy that you and others are joining us
Mm-hmm.
to pursue these issues, because these are fraught times. We need to be ready.
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head there. It's and it has kind of broken out the contest already, and it's in the information warfare space as well, which we have Mike and others that we're going to be contributing to that discussion on. But in terms of your ambition for where the NSI and the University of Canberra can contribute to this, what sort of things and activities do you think you'd like to see happen out here at UC and with the NSI?
Well, firstly, I want to make sure that the students who come here
Mm-hmm.
get a great education.
Right.
They get a rounded education. Business governance law, that's a faculty I'm in. I can focus on national security. I also teach a subject I call the challenge of modern terrorism,
Right.
because that is, I think, neglected at the moment. There is a huge challenge out there,
Mm.
and this is not 5 years or 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
This is 100 years.
Right.
This is a cosmic battle between good and evil, and they're not my words.
Mm-hmm.
We're the good guys,
Right.
but it will last for a very, very long time, and we need to be ready for that. You're right about information, disinformation. Who can we trust with the information? So I want the students to get a great education. I want them also to be able to contribute in the national security arena here in Canberra. And
Mm-hmm.
it's terrific when some of them come back and say, oh, I've got a job in defence, or
Right.
someone will give you a wink and say, well, I work for one of those agencies.
Right.
So Canberra is the epicentre of security for the country.
Mm-hmm.
It's mostly the policy. Some are going to work with the federal police, and that to me is really satisfying. But I also want to work on the agenda of what is national security. And I think we're in a bit of a hole at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
Under the Rudd government, the National Security Statement to Parliament, Julia Gillard
Mm-hmm.
made a national security strategy in January 2013.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was the high water mark of combining all of these different agencies
Mm-hmm.
and producing a whole of government response.
Right.
I think we need to come back to that. So to me, that's an important part.
Right.
How can we work that discussion? Because again, back to my career,
Mm-hmm.
I flew up to Iraq and Afghanistan, and I know you were there in both places, thinking, well, this is a whole of government response, because people were saying, well, it's a whole of government response.
Mm-hmm.
I'd go into Kabul or Kandahar or Baghdad or somewhere,
Mm-hmm.
and you'd look around, I couldn't see a whole of government. All I could see was a green uniform, occasional Air Force, and they did a great job, and the Navy. But where's the whole of government? And I think we really need to get that going, because whatever's coming isn't just for an army, isn't just for the Defence Force, it's for all of us, and we need to think about it. And we've just had the election. This is a guns and butter moment.
Yes.
Guns, I think the Defence Force is underfunded and needs to be directed in different ways. And it's hard to say we're giving too much to butter to social welfare, but I think the balance is out of whack. So there's another thing I'd like to try and achieve.
Yeah, question of priorities, meeting events, and
Absolutely, yeah.
So, and I guess trying to stimulate conversations amongst all the players who can contribute to the building of government policy, I guess, in a trusted space where, you know, we can bring in all the expertise and be a bit of a policy clearinghouse.
Well, I think it's got to be a policy creation house. We've just had the election, and frankly, Defence hardly got a mention. And that's not good enough, given what we've been told about the strategic circumstances. So there needs to be policy development. There needs to be a focus on that discussion. And I know that the new arrangements, we're not going to have white papers in defence anymore. And I worked on 4 of those damn things. They take a long time, and they are a place where you can think.
Yes.
I'm not sure what's coming next. Every 2 years, we're going to get some sort of statement. Are we going to get the right ideas? Are we going to understand the momentum in society, the momentum in what's happening in the broader community? And we talk about autocratic states. There's a bunch of them out there, and they're getting stronger. We talk about democratic states. Well, there aren't so many out there, and they seem to be getting weaker. Where do we stand as Australia?
No, these are really important discussions too, and what we'll be doing too is coming back to these with you to talk in more detail about that and how that we can stitch up that strategic level more effectively, what mechanisms could be explored. So this is really exciting that we have now this vehicle through your work in establishing the Institute, and then, you know, this ability to communicate around it and the activities, the forums and the conferences that we hope to do. So really excited to be working with you on this, and we'll build out our team over time, and I think be a place where students particularly might want to come and learn and benefit from all of that. So
certainly hope so, and I'm really pleased that you're here, because you and I have worked together before, and I've seen your exploits both as a soldier and as a lawyer, and I think you combine those 2 skills really well. So it's exciting that you're here and that you're able to attract others. So let's get going and talk about national security.
For sure. No, thanks very much, Peter, for coming in and having a chat with us today. And so that rounds out our team in relation to the National Security Institute and the people who you'll be seeing quite often on this podcast and the issues that we'll be talking about. So we'll finish the interview there, Peter, but thanks very much for being with us, and we'll come back to you soon to talk about some of these issues in more detail, particularly focusing to begin with on this information warfare issue. So we'll see you again next time.